Imagine a time when the roar of four engines symbolized power and resilience. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, developed in the 1930s, emerged as a beacon of American ingenuity for the United States Army Air Corps, USAC. This high-flying bomber was not just a machine, it was a fortress in the sky, feared and respected during World War II. Its dominance in the European theater is legendary, as it dropped more bombs than any other aircraft, playing a pivotal role in the war effort. Picture the bustling airfields where B-17s lined up, their massive frames casting long shadows. These aircraft, the third most produced bombers after the American B-24 Liberator and the German Junkers Ju-88, were versatile warriors. They served not only as bombers but also as transports, anti-submarine hunters, drone controllers, and even rescue aircraft. In a dramatic turn of events, Boeing's Model 299X B-17 outshined its competitors in a USAC competition but faced a setback when it crashed, losing the initial contract to the Douglas B-18 Bolo. Undeterred, the Air Corps saw potential and ordered 13 more B-17s. By 1938, these planes were in service, constantly evolving through design improvements. The USAC, later known as the United States Army Air Forces, USAF, promoted the B-17 as a strategic weapon. It was built to soar high and fast, defend fiercely, and endure harsh battles, often returning home despite severe damage. The B-17's early missions in the Pacific War saw it striking Japanese shipping and airfields. Yet, its true legacy was forged in Europe. By day, B-17s complemented the RAF's night bombers, targeting German industry and military sites. Imagine the skies filled with these fortresses, relentlessly dropping over 640,000 tons of bombs on Nazi Germany and its territories. As of early 2024, 6 B-17s still soar, a testament to their enduring legacy. Around 50 others rest in museums or on display, with the oldest, the SWOOS, a B-17D, having fought on the first day of America's entry into World War II. Some wrecks, found underwater, tell silent tales of past glories. In 2022, these majestic planes made news when a tragic mid-air collision at an airshow brought attention to their storied history once more. Development. It's August 8, 1934. The USAC is looking for a new bomber to replace the aging Martin B-10. They envision an aircraft capable of patrolling the skies over Hawaii, Panama, and Alaska. This new bomber must carry a substantial bomb load at 10,000 feet for 10 hours and reach speeds of at least 200 miles per hour. The ideal candidate would also have a range of 2,000 miles and a top speed of 250 miles per hour. The stage is set for a fierce competition at Wilbur Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, featuring Boeing's design, the Douglas DB-1, and the Martin Model 146. Boeing's engineers, E. Gifford Emery and Edward Curtis Wells, pour their expertise into the Model 299, built entirely with Boeing's resources. This prototype blends elements from the experimental XB-15 bomber and the 247 transport. Armed with 5.30 caliber machine guns and capable of carrying up to 4,800 pounds of bombs, the Model 299 is powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney R1690 Hornet radial engines, each delivering 750 horsepower. Fast forward to July 28, 1935. The skies above Seattle are filled with anticipation as the Model 299 takes its maiden flight, piloted by Boeing's chief test pilot, Leslie Tower. The day before, Richard Williams of the Seattle Times had coined the term Flying Fortress, inspired by the array of machine guns bristling from the aircraft. The name quickly catches on, and Boeing trademarks it. They proudly tout the Model 299's ability to complete missions even if one of its 4 engines fails. On August 20, 1935, the prototype embarks on an impressive journey from Seattle to Wright Field, covering the distance in 9 hours and 3 minutes at an average speed of 252 miles per hour. During the competition, Boeing's 4-engine Marvel outperforms the twin-engine DB-1 and Model 146. By March 1935, Army Chief of Staff General Douglas MacArthur has established the GHQ Air Force, appointing Brigadier General Frank Maxwell Andrews to lead. Both MacArthur and Andrews believe in the superiority of large, 4-engine bombers over their twin-engine counterparts and view the B-17 as pivotal to the USAC's future. October 30, 1935, dawns with a critical test flight to determine the Model 299's climb rate and service ceiling. Major Ployer Peter Hill, Wright Field's Material Division Chief of the Flying Branch, is piloting the aircraft for the first time, with Lieutenant Donald Putt as co-pilot and Boeing's Leslie Tower advising. Tragically, the plane stalls and crashes shortly after takeoff, bursting into flames. Hill and Tower succumb to their injuries. Investigations reveal that the control surface gust lock had not been released before takeoff, leading to the crash. This incident directly leads to the creation of the modern written checklist used by pilots today. Despite the crash disqualifying Model 299 from the competition, its performance leaves a lasting impression. However, the Army is cautious due to its high cost. Douglas quotes a price of $58,200 per unit, while Boeing's price stands at $99,620. General Malin Craig, MacArthur's successor, cancels the order for 65 B-17s and opts for 133 twin-engine Douglas B-18 Bolos. In October 1938, Secretary of War Harry Hines Woodring decides against purchasing any four-engine bombers for 1939, including the B-17. Despite the crash, the performance of Boeing's prototype had left a lasting impression on the USIC. On January 17, 1936, leveraging a legal loophole, the Air Corps ordered 13 B-17s for service testing. These aircraft, later redesignated as Y-1B-17 to signify their special funding, showcased several improvements over the Model 299, most notably the powerful Wright R1820-39 Cyclone engines. Though the prototype never received a military serial, the term XB-17 became the identifier for this pioneering airframe, marking the birth of the Flying Fortress legend. Between March 1 and August 4, 1937, 12 of the 13 Y-1B-17s were delivered to the 2nd Bombardment Group at Langley Field in Virginia. Here, they underwent operational development and flight tests. One critical innovation adopted was the pre-flight checklist, a direct response to the Model 299 crash. One of their first notable missions saw 3 B-17s, under the guidance of lead navigator Lieutenant Curtis LeMay, tasked by General Andrews to intercept and photograph the Italian ocean liner Rex 610 miles off the Atlantic coast. The mission was a resounding success and garnered widespread publicity. The 13th Y-1B-17 found its home at the Material Division at Wright Field, Ohio, for extensive flight testing. Meanwhile, a 14th aircraft, designated Y-1B-17A and originally intended for ground testing, received an upgrade with exhaust-driven General Electric turbo superchargers. Although it faced initial problems, delaying its first flight to April 29, 1938, it was eventually delivered to the Army on January 31, 1939. With service testing complete, the Y-1B-17s and Y-1B-17A officially became B-17 and B-17A, respectively, marking their operational status. The Y-1B-17A boasted a maximum speed of 311 miles per hour at its optimal altitude, significantly faster than the Y-1B-17, and a new service ceiling of 38,000 feet, over 2 miles higher than its predecessor. These advancements were integrated into the B-17B model. As opposition to the Air Corps plans for more B-17s diminished, 10 additional B-17Bs were ordered in late 1937 to equip 2 bombardment groups on each U.S. coast. Featuring larger flaps, rudder, and a well-framed plexiglass nose, the B-17Bs were delivered in batches from July 1939 to March 1940. By July 1940, an order for 512 B-17s had been placed, yet by the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, fewer than 200 were in Army service. Between January 11, 1937, and November 30, 1941, 155 B-17s of various models were delivered. Production then rapidly accelerated, with the B-17 at one point holding the record for the highest production rate of any large aircraft. These bombers served in every World War II combat zone, and by the end of production in May 1945, a staggering 12,731 B-17s had been built by Boeing, Douglas, and Vega, a Lockheed subsidiary. Design and variants. The B-17 underwent numerous changes throughout its development. Of the 13 B-17s ordered for service testing, 12 found their way to the 2nd Bomb Group at Langley Field, Virginia. Here, they played a crucial role in developing heavy bombing techniques. The 13th YB-17 was sent to the Material Division at Wright Field, Ohio, for flight testing. This led to the introduction of General Electric turbo superchargers, which later became a staple on the B-17 line. Meanwhile, a 14th aircraft, the YB-17A, initially meant for ground testing, received upgrades with turbochargers and was redesignated B-17A after testing concluded. As production progressed, Boeing engineers kept refining the design. The B-17B emerged with larger rudders and flaps for better performance at slower speeds. The B-17C replaced 3 bulged gun blisters with 2 flush gun window openings and added a bathtub gun gondola on the lower fuselage, resembling the ventral defensive emplacement on the German Heinkel He-111P bomber. Shifting from defense to offense, the B-17E marked a significant evolution. This model featured an extended fuselage by 10 feet, a larger rear fuselage, vertical tail fin, rudder, and horizontal stabilizer. A gunner's position was added in the new tail, while the nose retained its 10-panel glazing. The B-17E also introduced electrically powered dorsal and ventral ball turrets. These modifications increased the aircraft's weight by 20%. The B-17's engines were upgraded to more powerful versions of the Wright 1820 Cyclone 9, and additional machine gun placements were added. The B-17F became the primary variant used by the 8th Air Force against Germany in 1943. It standardized the manned Sperry ball turret for ventral defense and introduced an enlarged, nearly frameless plexiglass bombardier's nose for better forward vision. Experimental versions included the XB-38 and YB-40. The XB-38 tested Allison V1710 liquid-cooled engines but crashed on its 9th flight, leading to the concept's abandonment. The YB-40, designed as a heavily armed modification with additional turrets and guns, faced difficulties keeping up with lighter bombers and was phased out by July 1943. However, the final production blocks of the B-17F adopted the B-40's chin turret for improved forward defense. The definitive B-17G appeared with an increased number of guns, finalized gun station designs, and other enhancements. A total of 8,680 B-17Gs were built, with the last rolling off the Lockheed assembly line on July 28, 1945. Many B-17Gs were converted for other missions like cargo hauling, engine testing, and reconnaissance. Some were initially designated SB-17G for search and rescue duties and later redesignated B-17H. Towards the end of World War II, at least 25 B-17s were fitted with radio controls and television cameras, loaded with 20,000 pounds of explosives, and designated BQ-7 Aphrodite missiles for Operation Aphrodite. This operation aimed to destroy heavily fortified German bunkers by remotely flying these drones onto their targets, guided by CQ-17 mothership control aircraft. The first mission on August 4, 1944, saw mixed success, and further missions, including one involving Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., faced similar challenges. The Aphrodite project was ultimately scrapped in early 1945. Operational history. In 1941, the B-17 began its operational journey in World War II with the Royal Air Force, RAF, and in the Southwest Pacific with the U.S. Army. Picture this. The 19th Bombardment Group had just settled at Clark Field in the Philippines, preparing for a significant bomber buildup in the Pacific. Their plans were abruptly interrupted on December 8, 1941, when half of their B-17s were destroyed on the ground during refueling and rearming for an attack on Japanese airfields in Formosa. Despite this setback, the remaining B-17s continued their fight against the Japanese invasion forces before withdrawing to Darwin in Australia's Northern Territory. Early in 1942, the 7th Bombardment Group landed in Java, bringing a mixed fleet of B-17s and Pound 30/B-24s. One squadron from this force detached to the Middle East, joining the 1st Provisional Bombardment Group and becoming the first American B-17 squadron to engage German forces. After their defeat in Java, the 19th withdrew to Australia, continuing combat operations until mid-1942 when General George C. Kenney sent them home upon his arrival. July 1942 saw the first USAF B-17s arriving in England to join the 8th Air Force. By the end of the year, two groups moved to Algeria, joining the 12th Air Force for operations in North Africa. The B-17s played a pivotal role in the Daylight Precision strategic bombing campaign against German targets. Their missions ranged from hitting U-boat pens and docks to targeting warehouses and airfields, as well as industrial sites like aircraft factories. European weather, often cloudy, meant bombing was frequently instrumentated. As part of the campaign against German aircraft production in preparation for the invasion of France, B-17 and B-24 raids drew Luftwaffe fighters into battles with Allied fighters. Throughout World War II, the B-17 was the backbone of 32 overseas combat groups. By August 1944, the inventory peaked at 4,574 USAF aircraft worldwide. In comparison, British heavy bombers like the Avro Lancaster and Handley Page Halifax dropped a staggering 608,612 long tons and 224,207 long tons of bombs, respectively. In the early days of World War II, the RAF found itself without enough modern heavy bombers. The largest long-range medium bombers available in significant numbers were the Vickers Wellington, which could carry 4,500 pounds of bombs. By 1941, the RAF's primary bombers were the Short Stirling and Handley Page Halifax. However, in early 1940, the RAF reached an agreement with the U.S. Army Air Corps to acquire 20 B-17CS, designated as Fortress Mk.I. Their first mission was on July 8, 1941, targeting Wilhelmshaven. Unfortunately, this operation didn't succeed. Later, on July 24, 3 B-17s from 90 Squadron participated in a raid on the German ships Gneisenau and Prince Eugene in Brest. They flew at 30,000 feet to draw German fighters away from lower altitude Handley Page Hamptons and Vickers Wellingtons. However, the plan didn't unfold as expected, and 90 Squadron's fortresses faced no opposition. By September, the RAF had lost 8 B-17CS in combat and dealt with numerous mechanical issues. These experiences led Bomber Command to abandon daylight raids using the Fortress I due to its poor performance. This highlighted to both the RAF and USAF that the B-17C needed better defenses, larger bomb loads, and more accurate bombing methods. Despite RAF's concerns about the effectiveness of daylight bombing, the USAF continued using the B-17 as a day bomber. Bomber Command's curtailed use of the Fortress Mk.I led to their transfer to Coastal Command for long-range maritime patrols. Starting in July 1942, Coastal Command's fleet was boosted by 45 Fortress Mk.I's, B-17E, followed by 19 Fortress Mk.II's, B-17F, and 3 Fortress Mk.I's, B-17G. On October 27, 1942, a Fortress IA from No. 206 Squadron RAF sank U-627, marking the first of 11 U-boat kills credited to RAF fortresses during the war. With the arrival of sufficient consolidated liberators, Coastal Command withdrew the fortress from the Azores, repurposing them for meteorological reconnaissance. 3 squadrons collected vital weather data from airfields in Iceland, Scotland, and England. The RAF's No. 223 Squadron, part of 100 Group, operated several fortresses outfitted with an electronic warfare system known as Airborne Cigar, ABC. German-speaking radio operators used this system to identify and jam German ground controllers' broadcasts to their night fighters. They could also mimic ground controllers to mislead night fighters away from the bomber streams. The transformation of the Air Corps into the United States Army Air Forces, USAF, on June 20, 1941, marked a significant shift in bombing strategies during World War II. Picture the B-17 bombers soaring high above Europe, guided by the then-secret Norden bombsight, known as the Blue Ox. This advanced device, an optical electromechanical gyrostabilized analog computer, allowed bombardiers to pinpoint the exact moment to release their bombs for maximum impact. During bomb runs, the bombardier would essentially take control, ensuring the aircraft maintained a steady altitude for precise targeting. Soon after joining the war, the USAF began amassing its air forces in Europe with B-17s. The first units of the 8th Air Force arrived in High Wycombe, England, on May 12, 1942, forming the 97th Bomb Group. On August 17, 1942, a notable mission unfolded. 12 B-17s from the 97th, led by Major Paul Tibbets and accompanied by Brigadier General Ira Eaker as an observer, embarked on the first USAF heavy bomber raid over Europe. They targeted the large railroad marshalling yards at Rouen-Sotteville in France. Escorted closely by 4 squadrons of RAF Spitfire 9s and 5 squadrons of Spitfire Versus, the bombers navigated through clear skies. The mission was a success, with only minor damage to 1 aircraft and half the bombs hitting their intended targets, easing British doubts about the effectiveness of American heavy bombers in European operations. As the bombing campaign intensified, 2 more groups arrived in Britain, bringing the first B-17FS. These aircraft became the primary off-heavy bombers against the Germans until September 1943. The frequency and scale of American raids increased, leading to stronger German interception efforts. One such intense encounter occurred during the bombing of Kiel on June 13, 1943, highlighting the growing risks. As a result, the USAF began discouraging unescorted bombing missions, acknowledging the heightened danger from German defenses. At the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, American and British bomber commands aligned their strategies to launch the combined bomber offensive. This plan aimed to weaken the Wehrmacht, shatter German morale, and secure air superiority by targeting German fighter strength through Operation Point Blank. The USAF focused on daytime raids, while the British tackled night operations, primarily targeting industrial cities. Operation Point Blank commenced with strikes on Western European targets. General Ira C. Eaker and the 8th Air Force prioritized the destruction of the German aircraft industry, focusing on fighter assembly plants, engine factories, and ball bearing manufacturers. By April 1943, heavily fortified industrial sites in Bremen and Recklinghausen faced relentless bombing. Despite these efforts, German fighter strength remained formidable, prompting the formation of additional B-17 groups for deeper incursions into Germany. The 8th Air Force aimed at the ball bearing factories in Schweinfurt to cripple the German war effort. The first raid on August 17, 1943, saw 230 B-17s intercepted by 300 Luftwaffe fighters. The attack resulted in the loss of 36 aircraft and 200 men, with an additional 24 bombers lost in a raid on Regensburg the same day. A second attempt on Schweinfurt on October 14, 1943, known as Black Thursday, proved even more costly. Of the 291 attacking fortresses, 60 were shot down, 5 crashed upon returning, and 12 were scrapped due to severe damage. In total, 77 B-17s were lost, with 122 others damaged. Out of 2,900 crew members, about 650 did not return, with some captured as prisoners of war. Faced with unsustainable losses, the USAF suspended deep daylight raids into Germany until long-range escort fighters like the North American P-51 Mustang and Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, equipped with extended-range drop tanks, could provide protection. These escorts significantly reduced loss rates during Big Week in February 1944, a concentrated series of raids targeting German aircraft production. The combined efforts of bombers and escort fighters during Big Week saw 247 B-17s lost in 3,500 sorties, reducing the loss rate to below 7%. By September 1944, B-17s were used by 27 of the 42 bomb groups in the 8th Air Force and 6 of the 21 groups in the 15th Air Force. Despite continued heavy flak losses, the Allies gained the upper hand in Europe. By April 27, 1945, just 2 days after the last heavy bombing mission, aircraft loss rates had dropped so significantly that replacement aircraft were no longer needed, marking the effective end of the combined bomber offensive. On December 7, 1941, a group of 12 B-17 bombers from the 38th and 88th Reconnaissance Squadrons flew into the chaos of Pearl Harbor. Leonard "Smitty" Smith Humiston, co-pilot on First Lieutenant Robert H. Richards' B-17C, initially mistook the explosions for a 21-gun salute. Realization hit as Japanese fighter planes strafed the ground. Despite the onslaught, 10 of the 12 B-17 survived. Richards' plane, however, took over 200 bullet hits, leaving it beyond repair. In the Philippines, the Far East Air Force, FEAF, stationed 35 B-17s by 1941, aiming to expand to 165. General Lewis H. Brereton, upon hearing of Pearl Harbor, ordered immediate patrols to avoid being grounded. Plans to strike Japanese airfields in Formosa were delayed by a series of confusing orders. When the B-17s finally prepared for takeoff, Japanese bombers hit, decimating half the fleet and crippling the rest over subsequent days. December 10, 1941, saw Colin Kelly's B-17C engage in a dramatic encounter. Misreported as a suicide dive into the Japanese battleship Haruna, his bombs narrowly missed the cruiser Ashigara. Kelly held the burning fortress steady long enough for his crew to escape, earning a posthumous Distinguished Service Cross. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who claimed Kelly's B-17, later praised the aircraft's resilience. Early Pacific battles like the Coral Sea and Midway highlighted the B-17's challenges. Bombing from high altitudes, their accuracy suffered. However, their moment of triumph came during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. On March 2, 1943, 6 B-17s attacked a Japanese convoy, using skip bombing to sink Kyokusei Maru and damage other ships. The next day, 13 B-17s bombed the dispersed convoy. P-38 Lightnings escorting the B-17s engaged numerous Zero fighters, resulting in heavy losses on both sides. By September 1942, 168 B-17s were deployed in the Pacific. General Arnold decided to replace them with B-24s and later B-29s, which were better suited for the region's demands. The transition was completed by mid-1943, ending the B-17's combat role in the Pacific. Surviving aircraft were reassigned to airdrop missions, supporting Australian commandos near Rabaul. Later in the war, B-17s found a new role in combat search and rescue. Redesignated as B-17HS and SB-17Gs, these planes dropped lifeboats to stranded crews. Nicknamed Dumbos, they played a crucial role in rescuing downed bomber crews and remained in service long after the war. In the early battles of the Pacific, B-17s struggled to make a significant impact, especially during the Battle of Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway. The 5th Air Force B-17s were assigned to disrupt Japanese sea lanes, but bombing from high altitudes proved ineffective, with only 1% of bombs hitting their targets. Despite this, B-17s flew at heights too high for most A-6M0 fighters to reach, offering some protection. The B-17s found their moment of triumph in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. On March 2, 1943, 6 B-17s from the 64th Squadron, flying at 10,000 feet, attacked a Japanese troop convoy near New Guinea. They used skip bombing to sink the transport ship Kyokusei Maru, carrying 1,200 soldiers, and damaged 2 other transports, Teiyo Maru and Nojima. The following day, 13 B-17s flying at 7,000 feet bombed the dispersed convoy, reducing their anti-aircraft defenses. During this attack, several Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters engaged the B-17s, leading to a fierce battle with P-38 Lightning escorts. One B-17 was lost, its crew parachuting into the sea, where they were strafed by Japanese pilots. However, Allied fighters quickly retaliated, shooting down 5 Zeros. The convoy's remaining transports and destroyers were attacked by Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters and Assault B-25 Mitchells using low-level strafing and skip bombing tactics. On March 4, a B-17 dropped a 500-pound bomb on the destroyer Asashio, sinking it while it was rescuing survivors. At their peak in September 1942, 168 B-17s operated in the Pacific. However, General Arnold soon deemed them unsuitable for Pacific operations and planned to replace them with B-24s and later B-29s. By mid-1943, B-17 combat missions in the Pacific had ceased. The remaining B-17s were repurposed for special airdrop missions, supporting ground forces and Australian commandos near the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul. Later in the war, B-17s were used in combat search and rescue roles. Redesignated as B-17HS and later SB-17Gs, these aircraft carried and dropped lifeboats to stranded bomber crews. Nicknamed Dumbos, these planes continued to serve long after World War II, providing a lifeline to downed airmen in the vast Pacific. Before the arrival of long-range fighter escorts, B-17 crews had to rely on their .50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns to fend off enemy attacks. As the war intensified, Boeing listened to feedback from aircrews, leading to significant improvements in each new variant, with increased armament and better armor. The B-17G, for instance, was bristling with 13.50 caliber machine guns, compared to the 4 in the B-17C. However, defending the bombers was challenging. The planes had to fly straight and level during their bomb runs, making it difficult to evade enemy fighters. A 1943 ASOF survey revealed that over half of the bombers shot down had strayed from the main formation. To counter this, the US developed the bomb group formation, evolving into the staggered combat box. This allowed B-17s to cover each other with their guns, making the formation a formidable opponent. Assembly ships, with their distinctive paint schemes, guided the bombers into formation, saving precious time. Luftwaffe pilots compared attacking a B-17 combat box to confronting a flying porcupine, with machine guns pointing in every direction. Yet, the rigid formation meant the bombers couldn't dodge incoming attacks, leaving them vulnerable to flak and high-speed strafing runs by German fighters. Losses were high, reaching 25% on some early missions. It wasn't until long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang provided escort that the B-17 missions became more effective. Despite these challenges, the B-17 earned a reputation for its durability. Stories of bombers returning with shredded tails, destroyed engines, and massive holes in their wings became legendary. Wally Hoffman, a B-17 pilot with the 8th Air Force, once said, "The plane can be cut and slashed almost to pieces by enemy fire and bring its crew home." Martin Caden recounted an incident where a B-17, after colliding with a Focke-Wulf FW-190 and suffering severe damage, still managed to return home. This toughness made up for the B-17's shorter range and lighter bomb load compared to the B-24 and British Avro Lancaster. The Memphis Belle and other famous B-17s contributed to its iconic status. The B-17 also adopted early electronic countermeasures like window and carpet, which confused German radar and significantly reduced flak effectiveness, saving countless bombers. The B-17's combination of durability, large operational numbers, and technological advancements made it a key player in the air war over Europe. The Luftwaffe studied the wreckage of downed B-17s and B-24s and found that it took about 20 hits with 20mm shells to bring these bombers down. On average, a pilot had to fire 1,000 rounds to achieve those 20 hits, as only about 2% of the shots found their mark. Early FW-190s, among Germany's best interceptors, were initially equipped with two 20mm MGFF cannons, later upgraded to Mauser MG-151 20 cannons for better range and firepower. As the war progressed, some FW-190s carried up to 6 MG-151 20 cannons and twin 13mm machine guns. German pilots discovered that attacking from the front, where the B-17s had fewer defensive guns and the pilots were less protected, was more effective. It took only 4 or 5 hits from this angle to down a bomber. To improve their attack capabilities, the FW-190s were modified into the Sturmbach version, doubling their cannon count and increasing ammunition, creating a formidable bomber-destroyer. In mid-1943, The Luftwaffe introduced the 21 cm Navalwerfer-derived Werfer-Grenade 21 rocket mortar. Mounted under the wings of single-engine fighters and some twin-engine Bf-110s, these rockets promised a significant standoff weapon. However, their slow speed and ballistic drop limited their effectiveness against the tight formations of B-17s. Other heavy-caliber cannons, like the 37, 50, and even 75mm Bordkanon series on aircraft like the Ju-88P and Me-410, also failed to make a substantial impact. The Me-262 jet fighter, with its 4 Mk108 cannons and later R-4M rockets, posed a more serious threat. These jets could attack from beyond the range of the B-17's defensive guns and destroy bombers with just one hit. The powerful hexagon explosive in the Mk108 shells and R-4M warheads made these attacks devastatingly effective. Despite these advancements, the strategic bomber offensive continued. The B-17 formations, bristling with machine guns, remained a challenging target, and the arrival of long-range fighter escorts like the P-51 Mustang gradually shifted the balance. The Luftwaffe's relentless attacks, using increasingly advanced tactics and weaponry, underscored the fierce aerial battles that defined the European theater. Post-war history. After World War II, the B-17 quickly transitioned from a bomber to various other roles before being mostly retired. Army Air Forces crews flew the bombers back across the Atlantic, where many were sold for scrap and melted down. However, some B-17s found new life in secondary roles such as VIP transports, air-sea rescue, and photo reconnaissance. Strategic Air Command, SAC, established in 1946, utilized reconnaissance B-17s, initially designated F-9 and later reclassified as RB-17, until 1949. The USAF Air Rescue Service, part of the Military Air Transport Service, MATS, operated B-17s as Dumbo Air-Sea Rescue aircraft. These aircraft, which began carrying airborne lifeboats in 1943, entered service in Europe in February 1945 and supported B-29 raids against Japan. Around 130 B-17s were converted for this role, initially as B-17H and later as SB-17G. Some of these aircraft had their defensive guns removed, while others retained them for operations near combat zones. The SB-17s remained in service through the Korean War until the mid-1950s. In 1946, surplus B-17s were chosen as drone aircraft for atmospheric sampling during the Operation Crossroads atomic bomb tests. These drones could fly close to or even through mushroom clouds without risking a crew. This led to more conversions of B-17s into drones and drone control aircraft, used for further atomic testing and as targets for surface-to-air and air-to-air missile tests. A total of 107 B-17s were converted into drones. The last operational mission flown by a USAF Fortress occurred on August 6, 1959. A DB-17P, serial number 44-83684, directed a QB-17G from Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico, serving as a target for an AIM-4 Falcon air-to-air missile fired from a McDonnell F-101 Voodoo. A retirement ceremony was held at Holloman AFB shortly after, and 44-83684 was retired. It later appeared in various films and the 1960s television show 12 O'Clock High before being preserved at the Plains of Fame Aviation Museum in Chino, California. The Memphis Belle, perhaps the most famous B-17, has been restored to its wartime appearance by the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. The restoration of the B-17D The Swoos is also underway at the same museum. Under Project Cadillac II, the B-17G was fitted with an AN/APS-20 radar, transforming it into the PB-1 Watt, one of the first airborne early warning aircraft. As World War II drew to a close and in the years immediately following, the United States Navy, USN, acquired 48 former ASOF B-17s for patrol and air-sea rescue missions. The first two B-17s, a B-17F, later modified to B-17G Standard, and a B-17G, were obtained for various development programs. Initially, these aircraft retained their ASOF designations, but on July 31, 1945, they were redesignated as PB-1, a nod to an earlier Boeing experimental flying boat from 1925. 32 B-17Gs were converted into PB-1WS, distinguished by a large radome under the fuselage for an S-band and /APS-20 search radar. Additional internal fuel tanks were installed for extended range, and provisions were made for underwing fuel tanks. Although initially chosen for their heavy defensive armament, this feature was later removed. Painted in the Navy's standard dark blue, these PB-1WS served until 1955, gradually being replaced by the Lockheed WV-2, later known as the EC-121. In July 1945, 16 B-17s were transferred to the Coast Guard through the Navy. Initially assigned U.S. Navy Bureau numbers, BUNO, they were delivered to the Coast Guard as PB-1Gs starting in July 1946. These aircraft were stationed at various bases, including Coast Guard Air Station Elizabeth City, North Carolina, CAS San Francisco, NAS Argentia, Newfoundland, CAS Kodiak, Alaska, and a base in Washington State. Primarily used in the Dumbo Air Sea Rescue role, they also performed iceberg patrols and photo mapping missions. The Coast Guard PB-1Gs remained in service throughout the 1950s, with the last one being withdrawn on October 14, 1959. In the covert world of espionage, B-17s found a unique role. The CIA front companies Civil Air Transport, Air America, and Intermountain Aviation utilized these bombers for special missions. One such aircraft, B-17 G-44-85531, registered as N809Z, was primarily used for agent drop missions over the People's Republic of China, operating from Taiwan with Taiwanese crews. These daring missions were perilous, and 4 B-17s were lost to enemy fire. By 1957, the remaining B-17s had been stripped of their weapons and painted black, ready for covert operations. One of these Taiwan-based B-17s made its way to Clark Air Base in the Philippines in mid-September, preparing for missions into Tibet. A remarkable operation took place on May 28, 1962. Pilots Connie Sigrist and Douglas Price flew N809Z, carrying Major James Smith, USAF, and Lieutenant Leonard A. Leshak, USNR, to the abandoned Soviet Arctic Ice Station NP-8 as part of Operation Cold Feet. Smith and Leshak parachuted from the B-17, exploring the station for several days. On 1 June, Sigrist and Price returned, employing a Fulton skyhook system installed on the B-17 to retrieve Smith and Leshak. N809Z continued to make history, performing a skyhook pickup in the 1965 James Bond movie Thunderball. After its illustrious service, the aircraft was restored to its original B-17G configuration and displayed at the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum in McMinnville, Oregon, until it was sold to the Collings Foundation in 2015. As we journeyed through the incredible history and feats of the B-17 Flying Fortress, we saw how this legendary aircraft left an indelible mark on aviation and military history. From its daring missions during World War II to its special operations in the Cold War, the B-17 has proven its resilience and adaptability time and again. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most iconic bombers ever built. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more fascinating stories from the annals of military history. Thanks for watching. The Animated General, out.